Great.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to lesson number 3 of our Meditation from Sinai course. We'll begin with a brief overview of last week's lesson. So last week, we talked about the soul, right? Each and every one of us has the soul. It's compared to a flame, because just like a flame constantly yearns to lose itself and to become something that's part of something that's bigger and greater than itself, so too is our soul, right? Our soul is passionate. Our soul is fiery, right? Our soul desires to unite with its source, with its creator. Recognizing that fact, that there exists within ourself such a fiery, passionate, selfless soul, critical, absolutely vital, but we got to get in touch with it. Jewish meditation plays a major role in helping us get in touch with our soul, because as we all know, we have a body too. And that body tends to get in the way. That body tends to overshadow and overpower and to really be in control in the way of tapping into our soul. So we discussed 2 different forms of Jewish meditation. Number 1, we talked about hispaidus. Hispaidus means to go into a place of seclusion. We want to clear our mind. We want to empty our mind from anything that perhaps could be a distraction. Quiet down the body, separate ourselves from the material in the hopes that our soul will then rise to the surface. But most of the class, we focused on another form of meditation, which is called hispaidus, right? In hispaidus, what do we want to do? We don't want to quiet ourselves away from the material. It's not about secluding ourselves. It's about tuning into the soul. It's focusing on the soul, amplifying the soul. It's much more about contemplative meditation, and you can see that in the makeup of the word hispaidus. Hispaidus means contemplative meditation. If you break down the word hispaidus, you'll find it has the word bina in it. Bina means contemplation, and it has the word binyan in it, which means building. The idea and the goal of hispaidus is to think deeply about a topic, which will result in constructing an entirely new perspective on how you view and look at the world. We concluded last week's class by doing a hispaidus meditation. What was the meditation? We discussed that just as we have a soul, so too the universe has a soul as well. And just as we recognize when it comes to ourselves, the soul is the real us, right? The soul is that which is valuable. It's not our body that's most important. It's our soul that's most important. That represents our personality, our character, our hopes and dreams, and so on. It's the soul, not the body. In exactly the same way, it's the soul of the universe that is what matters and and what is the most valuable. It's not the physical. It's not the material. When we contemplate this, right, when we visualize this, we meditate this, we completely can refocus our priorities. Our entire focus of our priorities totally and completely changes when we focus on what is the most valuable, right, and the most important and the most critical to our life, right? Any questions on what we discussed last week before we move on to today's topic? Because today we're going to go a lot further, a lot deeper. It's one long hispaidus meditation, right? Any thoughts? Right, seems like we are all on the same page, so we're going to continue. So we're picking up exactly where we left off last week. Just as we have a soul which animates our body, so too the universe has a soul which animates all of existence. Our body, without a soul, lifeless, inanimate, a lump of flesh. The same is true for the universe as well. Now, being that's the case, you might think, what is the soul? The soul is like a battery pack, right? The soul is like being plugged into some type of electricity, and that is what gives us power. However, the Medrash says that a soul is much deeper, much more powerful than that. Debbie, would you like to start us off with text number 2 on page 82? So text number 2 on page 82.
Sure. Okay, so page 82. And you said text number 2. Okay. King David exclaimed, "My soul blesses God." Why did he feel the need to emphasize that it was his soul that praised God? He told himself, just as the soul fills the body, so does God fill the universe. So King David concluded, let the soul, which possesses the same qualities as God, praise him.
So there are 2 points that I want to take out of this text. Number 1, we know, of course, that the soul animates the body. And just as the soul animates the body, there is a divine force, right? There's a soul that animates the world. But what this medrash adds is just as the soul fills the body, so does God fill the universe. The soul fills the body, and therefore the divine source fills the world. Now, what's important about the word fills? The soul is very different than a battery. Yes, a battery will power something, but the battery is not one with the item that it's powering. The battery sits in its own particular location, in one particular spot, and yes, it does give life and power the entity, but you can't say that the battery fills and becomes one and is intertwined with every element of the item. The item and the battery are 2 separate things. Similarly to electricity, you have a refrigerator in your kitchen. It's plugged into electricity. There is electricity flowing through it, which powers it. However, the electricity doesn't fill the refrigerator. Right? Every corner, every nook and cranny is not filled with the electricity of the refrigerator. The electricity is in one location. It powers the compressor, however it is that refrigerators work, and that's it. It doesn't fill the refrigerator. However, a soul fills the body. What does that mean? It means that number 1, it manifests itself and is expressed within every single nook and cranny of the body. It's the life force and the energy of the body, not in a general way, but in a specific way. It's not the physical eye that sees, or the ear that hears, or the leg that walks. It is the energy within the soul that expresses itself within the eye, and within the ear, and within the nose, that allows it to be animated in its unique, specific circumstance. What this means is, the soul, when it animates the body, does not do it like a battery. The soul animates the body in a very detailed, very specific flow of energy into that body. And the same is exactly true with the divine force that animates the world. The same way that the soul permeates every nook and cranny of the body and has very specific and unique energy for all of the particular functions of the body, so too the soul of the world fills the world, every single nook and cranny, and has very unique and detailed divine energy, which becomes the life force of every single particular unique thing in the world. So let's go to text number 3, where the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, elaborates on this idea. Craig, would you like to read text number 3?
Sure.
Thank you.
1 second, sorry. All right. A highly detailed self-awareness of the manner in which our own soul operates within our body will allow us to appreciate that the divine is manifest within every detail of the universe, and that each detail exists and is sustained through divine energy. This parallel is expressed in the teaching, just as the soul fills the body, so does God fill the world, and is expressed in the verse, from my flesh, I can perceive the divine. Every sensation and experience of the body, even the most insignificant, is an active expression of the soul. Similarly, even the smallest detail or phenomenon within the universe is actively directed by God. When we develop this awareness, we sense not only the divine providence in everything, but we see divinity clearly wherever we turn. We can literally see the divine exposed.
So this is a really beautiful paragraph because it tells us that every sensation of the body is absolutely an expression of the soul. The same thing applies to the world as well. Every detail of the universe is also an expression of God, which means not only notice how everything comes from God, because yes, we understand God created the world, so that means everything in the world is a creation of God. We're saying much more than that. Not only notice how everything comes from God, but to feel how everything is an expression of God. So what does that mean? Right? My computer is sitting on a table. We all understand that that table was created by God. We understand that the table has a soul, which is the life force and energy of that table. But that doesn't mean that there's a table that exists. And then there's a flow of life force from God that animates the table. Exactly the opposite, right? It is an expression of God that there is a temple. That there is a table. So the table is literally shaped by the spiritual energy that ultimately comes from God. So what determines whether something is a rock or a tree or a house or a tire? It is the divine energy that flows into it. Right? That is what determines that. Let's go to text number 4, where we have another beautiful text from the 6th Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. Phil, would you like to read text number 4, please, on page 84?
Okay. All right, it's actually, the English is on 85. Okay.
Oh, so yeah, good point.
The entirety of creation divides into 4 kingdoms: mineral, vegetable, animal, and human. Each of these is subdivided into myriads of specific species. If we examine the world of plants, for example, we encounter a broad spectrum of vegetation, such as trees, crops, vegetables, grass, herbs, each category of which is further divided into multiple species. There is an astonishing variety of trees, and each kind is unique and distinguished from all other trees. There is a tremendous diversity of plants and herbs, and again, each kind offers a unique nutritional value. Some are beneficial, while others are poisonous, and they each carry a unique design and set of properties. Furthermore, within each of these subspecies, there are countless individual units, each of which is similarly unique. Now, each individual unit possesses a unique life force, divine energy that is tailored for it. That life force is what we call its soul, the spiritual entity that animates it, causes it to grow, and guides everything that happens to it from the moment it sprouts from the earth until its last moment when it is plucked. Even the plant's final fate is within the jurisdiction of a specific divine providence that determines whether the plant will be harvested for an overt purpose, such as animal fodder, trampled underfoot in an apparent aimless manner, or whether in due course and disintegrate entirely. Such a matter is the result of a specific decision and calculation of divine providence. Everything in this world has unique divine energy that is life and guide. Each blade of grass is unique. It may appear identical to another blade, but closer examination reveals specific features that set a specific blade apart from every other blade of grass in the universe. This distinction is a result of specific divine energy that God invests into this blade. It's an entirely individualized divine manifestation.
So this is a really heavy-duty paragraph that tells us so much. I mean, there are upwards of 9 million unique species of life on this planet, right? Many of them we know very little about. Within each species, there are so many different types of characteristics, and there are so many different destinies, so to speak, of each and every one of these 9 million creatures throughout the world. What did the previous Rebbe say in this text? He basically said, just as the soul of every human being is unique and different, The soul of Debbie, of Craig, Phil, each one of us has our own unique makeup, has our own unique characteristic, has our own mission, purpose, and destiny in life. Exactly the same way, as we said, the soul fills the body, so too God fills the universe. The same way each and every one of us has a unique personality when it comes to our soul, so too not only every animal species, not only every plant species, but the Rebbe says every individual blade of grass has a unique, specific, personalized soul that's attributed to it. Let's go to text number 5. Debbie, you want to go to text number 5? A little short one.
Yes, okay, text number 5.
Bottom of page 86.
Okay. Rabbi Simeon said each blade of grass has a spiritual force that strikes it and tells it to grow.
So there's not some type of just, grass or randomly growing out there. No, every single individual blade of grass has unique and specific godly life force and energy that causes it to grow. Yes, Phil.
These two texts, can you give us a time when these were actually written?
So we'll go to the earlier text first. So
Yes.
the Medrash, if you look at the side of this book here, it says Bereshis Rabbah, right? And it gives you the background information as to when the Bereshis Rabbah was written. The Medrash was written at basically the same time that the Talmud was written. So we're talking texts that are like 1,500 to 2,000 years old. But that's not when these ideas originated, right? That's just when these ideas were written down. Because there was a period in Jewish history where things were not written down, and then things changed and we started to write them down. So that's where this Medrash comes from. This idea that's discussed in the Medrash is elaborated more in more Kabbalistic texts. And we see the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, who passed away in 1950, how he writes about it in quite detail in text number 4. And we've quoted him already a few times in today's lesson. Is that helpful, Phil?
Yeah, yes. It's the same concept that I asked last time, is trying to correlate when it was written down versus when it actually was conceived and discussed in its original form.
Pretty much all of the information that we are discussing today, right, is ancient Jewish spiritual practices that for whatever reason were not always the most accessible to the average person. And one of the things that one of the goals of the Hasidic movement and the revolution that the Hasidic movement brought to the world was to take some of these texts and make them relevant and be written in the language of every person. That these ideas shouldn't be just hidden away in books for specific scholars, but this is our heritage. This is for every single one of us. And that's, you see how the Sixth Rebbe elaborates and writes in a very lengthy fashion. So we're going to take this idea, all right, of the soul and the soul of the universe, and we're going to continue to reflect, give you information to meditate, and try to do some hisbonenus on this issue, so that it will result in generating true and real feelings and ultimately reshaping our perspectives on life. So we have thus far discussed in this class that every single thing in the universe is an expression of God and has a unique and specific detailed soul that designs it, that powers it, that it's life force. Now, with that information in mind, look at the world around you. Everything that you see, it's not simply stuff. Everything that you see is alive. Everything that you see has a godly spark, has a unique and specific divine soul that is shaping it, creating it, and giving it a unique purpose. Everything that exists, therefore, is absolutely an expression of God. It's not just stuff. It's not a couch. It's not a table. It's not a chair. Everything that you see is a unique expression of God. When we tap into that, when we become sensitive to that, we recognize that everything within the universe is essentially a divine symphony of creation. Your senses will be heightened, and everything in life is going to be a much richer experience. Look at the way the Baal Shem Tov writes about it, the founder of the Hasidic movement. Text number 6, Craig, please.
The following parable I heard from my master, my grandfather, Baal Shem Tov, of blessed memory. There was once a talented musician that played beautiful, sweet music. All who heard it were mesmerized by the sweet, pleasurable, blissful sounds. They could not hold themselves back from dancing to the rafters in sheer ecstasy. The closer the people drew to the source of music, the more entranced they became and the more ecstatic their dancing. Just then, a deaf individual came across the scene. Not noticing the musician, he simply observed people dancing wildly and regarded them as crazy. What on earth could make people so ridiculously joyful all of a sudden? He muttered to himself. Now, if he were intelligent, wise, and knowledgeable, he would deduce that they must be dancing to a delightful melody. In fact, contemplating the depth of pleasure they must be experiencing, judging by their response. He would be moved to join them in delightful dance. The analogy is obvious.
This is one of my favorite analogies in all of Hasidic philosophy. It's really, it's quite beautiful and quite striking. That for whatever reason, right, our body, right, can be deaf, right, to the beautiful music that's coming from our soul and that's coming from the soul of everything that's around us. The goal, right, the point of the hispoinenus, right, the Jewish meditation, contemplative meditation, is to reflect and think and to recognize and to truly connect with the idea that everything around us is pulsating with divine life. Everything that's around us has a powerful divine spark. As we said, every single blade of grass has a unique, individual, specific soul. When you're tuned into this, you can't help but dance. Right? It's going to completely affect the way that you're going to live. Right? If you're not tuned in, then just as the guy in the analogy over here, you think everyone has gone mad. I don't know if you've ever been to a friendship circle inclusion club, but one of the things that they do there is they have a silent disco, which means there's music blasting. People are dancing, but the music is blasting in your headphones. Right? There's no music in the rest of the room. So you might walk into a room and see a bunch of people dancing and think, what on earth is happening? I don't know what's going on. But if you're wearing those headphones, you're alive, you're transformed, you're completely uplifted, right? And that's what it means to recognize, to reflect, to think about, and to think deeply about not just the soul fills the body, but how the soul fills the universe. The more you think about it, right, the more you contemplate it, the more you connect with the idea, right? It rattles around your head. It becomes part of your natural train of thought. It becomes part of your consciousness. And you begin to sense and to perceive this in your life. The result is, through meditating on God's presence, you feel his closeness. The more you think about God, the more you perceive God, the more you feel God's presence. The more real God is in your mind, the more God is going to be real in your hearts. And you'll tangibly sense the godliness that's around you. Let's go to text number 8, another beautiful text from the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement. Phil, text number 8, please, on page 90. We will get to text 7 in a minute, but we're going to do text 8.
Okay, I want to make sure we read everything. Okay, text 8. It is a tremendous achievement to constantly meditate on the fact that we are close to God and that we are literally and entirely encompassed by his presence. We should try to remain connected to this reality to the extent that reflection becomes unnecessary because we mentally envision God everywhere, constantly. So at that point, we see that God is the place of the world. He pre-exists all of existence, and all of existence exists within God. This includes, of course, each of us as well. With this meditation, we fulfill the directive recorded in the Code of Jewish Law to set God before us at all times.
So the Baal Shem Tov says that the Code of Jewish Law says we are obligated, right, to set God before us at all times. However, it's pretty difficult to have a 24/7 ongoing Hispaninus meditation. Wouldn't you say? We got to work. There's other things in life. So what does the Baal Shem Tov say? That when a person actually practices successful Hispaninus, it actually becomes part of you. The result is that is now the way that you look at the world. That means 24/7, you can't be in a situation of Hispaninus. But when Hispaninus becomes part of your life, right, the result is it's like you're wearing glasses that are tinted, right? It shifts your mindset, allowing you to see the world differently, even when you aren't thinking about it. Even when you're not thinking about it, it affects you. It shapes you the way that you look at the world. You're a different person. The way you look at the world is with this deeper recognition and appreciation of the divine expression that everything is around you. Let's look at a few real-world practical effects that will be a result of this most powerful meditation. Number one is the recognition that we are never alone. And this is text number 7, again, from the Baal Shem Tov. Debbie, please. Oh, actually, you know what? Mitchell, would you like to read? You're there? I saw you there.
What page?
Text number 7 on page 89.
89, coming there. Text 7, meditating on God's presence. Meditate on the fact that the divine presence fills the entire universe and that God's intimate presence is with you constantly. This will allow you to be constantly joyful, realizing and believing with perfect faith that the divine presence is with you, protecting you. Realize that you are gazing at the divine and that God is gazing at you. God can do as he pleases, and he is the source of all of goodness and strength in the world. For his divinity and sustaining force is within each item of existence.
So there's a great series of commercials, advertisements by Allstate. And the line goes something along like this, right? You're in good hands with Allstate. Anyone familiar with this idea? What they're trying to communicate is not that if you have Allstate insurance, you will never get into a car accident. That's not what it means, right? What it means is no matter what happens to you on the road, there are no better hands that you could be in to deal with any circumstance and situation than Allstate, right? Don't feel anxious, don't feel worried, don't feel nervous. Because any car-related things, again, no better hands for you to be in than Allstate. The Baal Shem Tov says this is exactly the same idea when it comes to God. There are no better hands to be in than God's hands. Doesn't matter what's happening in life. As you know, not everything in life happens the way we would like, the way we would predict. Not everything is so smooth. And when things that we are not too excited about happen, we could get anxious, right? We could get nervous. We're throwing off our cool center. However, when we recognize that we are never alone, that we are with God every single second of the day, that leads a person to feel an incredible sense of security, right? There is no better hands to be in than God's hands. The result is a deep sense of joy. You're not alone. You're not forgotten. There's nothing to be scared about. In our last JLI course, we played a beautiful and very moving video clip about the life of Natan Sharansky, a refusenik thrown into prison. I think it was something like 16 years. I can't remember the exact amount of time. And what gave him the most strength? What was the source of his strength? Psalm 23. As I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil. Why? Because you are with me. He was in the shadow of death. He was in the worst possible circumstance you can imagine. He was in that Soviet prison. However, he was not alone. He was able to feel secure. He was able to feel safe. There's no better hands that he could be in than God's hands. And that allowed him to feel a sense of joy. He's not alone. He's not forgotten. When you realize that you're always with God, you're uplifted because you are infused with the presence of God everywhere and in every moment. There's a great video clip of the famous Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz. He's in Crown Heights, and he goes to the Lubavitcher Rebbe to get $1 on a Sunday morning. He passes by the Rebbe, and the Rebbe asks him, "Where is your wife?" And he says, "My wife did not accompany me on the trip. She's in Israel. I'm here alone." And the Rebbe has a big smile, and he says to him, "You are never alone. God is always with you." Now, the Rebbe was not a comedian, right? He did not just make humorous remarks to Adin Steinsaltz so people will smile, right? That wasn't the Rebbe's personality. He was trying to communicate something that's incredibly deep, right? You're never alone. People are traveling, you're in a foreign country, it's a different language, there's all kinds of obstacles that we face in all our challenges. What was the Rebbe saying to him? You're never alone. That's so powerful. It means God has your back. No matter what's taking place in life, God has your back. How do we generate this feeling and this sense of no better hands you could be in? God always has your back. You're never alone. Hispoinunus meditation, right? Reflecting, thinking deeply on the ideas that we're discussing tonight. Okay, let's take this meditation a step further, unless any questions. Debbie, you look like you might have a question.
Hey, I've always got something I can think of. But I just, it's interesting what you're saying. I find it really puzzling about the soul being in a blade of grass. I find that I'm really curious about that.
Why is a soul being in a blade of grass more curious than a soul being in a human being?
Well,
Now, yes,
even being in a chair would be even more curious about that.
Now, clearly, the degree of sophistication of the soul of a human being is different than the soul that's in a chair. Nevertheless, a human being and a chair and a blade of grass has a soul that's an expression of God that is unique and specific to it, that animates it, gives it shape, gives its color, gives it purpose, gives its function. And that's incredibly powerful, that everything in the world is an expression of God with unique soul. All right, let's continue, right? Your soul is not only present in your actions, it is the conscious actor. What that means is your body doesn't do anything on its own. Your body doesn't wake up in the morning, get dressed, and go to work. Your soul does that. Your soul is in your body, but it's your soul which is the one that makes the choices. It's the soul that actually does everything that you're going to do, correct? You would agree to that, right? The soul represents the very identity, purpose, and meaning that then is expressed in your body. Exactly the same way is the soul of everything that exists within the universe, right? Just as your soul is the conscious actor, it's the purpose, it's the meaning of everything, of you, exactly the same way is the soul of everything in creation, right? It's the conscious actor behind it as well. Right, so let's break this down a little bit.
Rabbi?
Yes, Craig.
Just a quick thing to share. I once heard a nice discussion from a rabbi, very brief, he asked everyone, how many of you believe you have a soul? And he chatted for a minute, and then he said, he doesn't believe he has a soul. He said, he has a body. He is a soul, right? I am a soul. I have a body. It's a nice change of a way to think about it.
Excellent, right? That's a beautiful way of looking at it, and it fits directly into so much of everything that we're talking about, right? We may have a body, but we are a soul. And just as our soul is what drives everything we do, same thing, everything in the world, right, is a soul, and it's the soul that drives everything that they do, which means there is an element of intentionality I don't know if that's a real word, but it fits in what I'm trying to say. There's an element of intentionality in everything, which means everything that happens is intentional and consciously guided by God. Just as we act intentionally, so too God acts intentionally through everything that he created in the world. Let's go to text number 9, which is a verse from Tehillim from the book of Psalms. Debbie, I believe it is your turn. Page 91, text number 9.
Okay. Everything is on purpose. Judaism teaches that God is everywhere and that his presence fills the universe.
But go to the text on the bottom of 9, where it says text number 9, he covers the heavens with clouds.
Oh, okay. So I'm actually he covers, oh yes, okay, got it. He covers the heavens with clouds, prepares rain for the earth, and causes mountains to sprout grass. He gives an animal its food, and as well to the hungry, young ravens that call out.
So what King David is writing here is that God actually runs the world. It's not ravens who are flying around and finding their own food. No, God feeds the ravens. That means even though it would appear that the ravens are going out and looking for lunch, that's not actually what's happening, right? Just as you, with purpose and with a conscious choice, go out there and do what you need to do, so too God is the soul behind everything in the world. God runs the world. Everything that takes place and happens has purpose. This means nothing happens by chance. When the wind blows, right, and blows a leaf off a tree, and that leaf twists and turns and falls to the ground, it is not by chance, it is not by happenstance, it is by divine design. Every turn of that leaf is controlled by God, and the very place where it lands is part of God's master plan. Whether that leaf lands on the earth, or whether that leaf becomes part of tea, or that leaf becomes part of a flower bouquet at a wedding, or whether that leaf becomes part of a preschool kids project, right? Every detail is orchestrated, is designed, is organized by God with intention. Now, we get glimmers of this, right, from time to time. Now, much of the time, life can be chaotic. We don't really understand why things are happening. But from time to time, we actually can step back and reflect on the things that happen, and we can see that everything worked out beautifully. All of these things that I couldn't imagine fell into place and achieved a result I never could have imagined, but is actually quite perfect, right? The pieces fit together beautifully. In Hasidic terminology, this is called hashgacha pratis, which translates to divine providence. God is continuously weaving together a master plan. When we heighten our awareness of the divine energy that is all around us, when we recognize that that everything has a soul, and the soul is actually its true identity, right? And therefore, just as our soul acts with conscious choice, so too God, who is the soul of everything, right? Nothing is by chance, right? Everything is with divine intention. We have developed the ability to sense the guiding hand that puts things in place for us exactly as is needed. You don't look at life as being random or frustrating. You look at life as being divine providence. Everything you do, everywhere you go, designed, organized, and is for us to extract the meaning and the purpose from all of it. And this has life-changing benefits. Why? Because most of the negativity that we experience in life is when we believe life is not meeting our expectations. Unmet expectations is the number one source for negative feelings. We feel guilty about the past not being what it should. We're anxious about the future, right, not turning out the way that we wanted it to. We feel angry about things that happened that we think should not have happened. What's the common denominator of so much of the negative feelings and frustration in life? We believe that the wrong thing happened, the wrong thing is happening, or that the wrong thing will happen, right? This is the source of so much negativity in life. But imagine if you believed, but not believed. Imagine if you knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that everything that happens in life is directed, is guided by God, and is part of some type of plan. And this God is a loving God, and he puts you in exactly into the position where you need to be. Imagine what that would feel like, right? There's a divine master plan. There would be tremendous amount of acceptance, not anger, frustration, and anxiety. It would also give you resilience, because that means you have the power, you have the energy, you have the strength to overcome any of those situations. Because this is not some random thing that can just knock you over and you have no choice. There's a divine plan, acceptance and resilience. The result is going to be less stress. You're going to feel much more grateful for what you have in life, and you are going to be empowered. You're going to be empowered. So there are tremendous payoffs from practicing hisbainunos, these meditations, on a daily basis. We are able to let go of what could have been and what should have been, and recognize that everything that is absolutely by divine design. Again, this does not mean that we're going to go through life pain-free, right? That's not what it means. What it means is the suffering that we put on ourselves. Again, so much of the suffering that we experience is suffering that we put on ourselves. By fighting reality, can be mitigated, can be lifted by this. The Rebbe used this meditation in counseling somebody who was struggling with some serious insecurity. Text number 10, Craig, please. Page 93, text number 10.
With reference to your writing about doubts and difficulty, and about a feeling of insecurity in general, I trust it is unnecessary to elaborate to you at length that such feelings arise when a person thinks that he is alone and can only rely upon himself and his own judgment, and therefore feels doubtful and insecure about each move he has to make. And while he also trusts in God, this trust is somehow superficial, without permeating him and his way of life in every detail, and only on certain days, such as the high holidays, he feels more close to God. But when a person's faith in God is deep, and when he reflects that God's benevolent providence extends to each and every person, and to each and every detail and each and every minute, surely he must develop a profound sense of security and confidence. The concept of divine providence is better understood in the original term of Hashkata Pratis, for Hashkata Pratis means careful watchfulness, for which reason the term Hashgacha is used also in connection with the law of kashrus, where every detail has to be carefully watched. Nor is another translation, which is sometimes used in connection with Hashkat Pratis, namely supervision, entirely satisfactory in this case, because the supervision implies overseeing, that is to say, seen from above, whereas Hashkacha, in the sense of God's watchfulness, means knowing matters through and through. The belief in such Hashkacha Pratis is basic to our religion and way of life, so much so that before every new year and during the beginning of the new year, we say twice daily, Psalm 27, God is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? God is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? From this, it follows that even if things happen not as desired according to human calculations, and even if it seems that even according to the Torah, it should have been different, a Jew still puts his trust in God.
Another incredible text. I think each text that we've read so far today could be read 3-4 times and is worthy of great reflection. Now, what does this text mean to me? So everyone here knows that 6 weeks, 8 weeks ago or so, right? My wife was diagnosed with cancer. Now, the first reaction, shock, fear, all kinds of negative emotions. But what was my immediate second reaction was to internalize everything that I'm teaching here, everything that I learned and was taught and was immersed in since I was born. And I said to myself, God runs the show, right? For whatever reason, this is part of our story. This is the way it's supposed to happen. This is part of the plan. For whatever reason, part of mine and my wife's mission in life, right, is to be experiencing this. This is exactly where we need to be. God's in control. God's running the show. And this is now part of our life experience and so on. That is a real practical benefit from this type of meditation. So let's review a little bit some of the ideas that we've discussed so far and then continue exploring it deeper. So we talked about that God is the divine force that powers all of existence in multiple different ways. One, right, God is the life force of everything that exists in the world. It fills and individuates every single element within existence, and it consciously guides all things and happenings. But there's one more detail that we have not mentioned yet, and that God orchestrates and runs everything, even the most minute detail of creation, right? This is all part of the very purpose of existence because everything is part of a master plan. Let's go to text number 11. Phil, please. Text number 11, we're going to, again, to the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, text number 11 on page 97.
Okay. The Baal Shem Tov taught that divine providence does not only mean that God orchestrates the individual movement of each of the manifold created entities, and that the same providence is actually determining the existence of life of that entity. It also means that the particular movement of a single entity bears a direct impact on the overall purpose of creation. Take, for example, the slightest quiver of a solitary sliver of a plant flourishing in the belly of the forest, or upon some tremendous mountain, or in one of our plant's deepest valleys that has never been traversed by a human. The plant's movements to the right, to the left, forward, backward, throughout the duration of its lifespan are actively determined by ongoing divine providence. God has issued a specific decree. This particular plant will live for a specified amount of months, days, and hours, that during this time it will return and bend in these directions at a certain amount of times. Beyond all that, however, each of these particular movements is significant for the overall purpose of creation. Through the combination and synthesis of all the myriad particular occurrences involving countless millions of species and subdivisions that exist within all of the four kingdoms, the sublime divine intent that underpins all of creation is consummated. Not only is every feature of every entity divinely orchestrated, it plays an indispensable role in the divine purpose of creation.
So this text tells us that every single thing in creation is part of the master plan. It's integral, it's critical, it's vital to the master plan. Let's apply this. If Russia goes to war with Ukraine, right? Let's hope it doesn't. Would you say that an event like Russia going to war with Ukraine would have some impact, would play some role in the purpose of creation, in the master plan, in the direction that the world is heading? Would you agree? Absolutely, right? Russia takes on Ukraine. This is an international war. The direction of countries, of countless lives, of economies is on the line. Absolutely, that plays into the master plan somehow. But that's not what the 6th Rebbe said in this paragraph. The 6th Rebbe said a bush, that's on a mountain in the middle of the darkest, deepest forest somewhere, a single leaf on that bush is critical and is vital to the master plan. Now that is heavy duty stuff. Now, we're very blessed that we live today with modern technology, because we have the ability to appreciate this in ways that perhaps some people couldn't. What do I mean by that? Look at in your book on page 98. Right? We have a figure 3.2. It says every moment and occurrence is like a single pixel. It may seem plain and meaningless in isolation, but it plays an integral part in the complete picture. If you look at the screen right here, right now, that's on the PowerPoint, there's a tiny orange square. Does not seem to be very valuable, does not seem to be very meaningful, it's just a dot, right? Each moment often can feel like that. But what's the truth? Each moment, right, is like a pixel. Remove the pixel, on its own it might not seem significant, but it drastically is going to have a huge effect on the picture. Each moment in life, even though on the surface we cannot see its significance, we can't see its value, we simply don't understand what it's all about. But the reality is it's an integral part of the master plan. It's an integral part of the picture that we're seeing. Everything, every occurrence is one picture of a large masterpiece. It may not seem significant, it may seem ugly. It may seem undesirable. But nevertheless, it's part of the plan. Sometimes you have to zoom out a little bit to be able to see how it fits in the whole picture. Let's take this idea and explain it a little bit deeper. So one of the tremendous benefits of meditation is reflecting that if everything in the world is on purpose and for a cosmic purpose, like for example, that leaf in a bush in the middle of the mountains, right, tens of thousands of miles away, if that leaf is there for a purpose, surely your very existence is too. Right? Recognizing our own worth, right? Recognizing our own value. If a leaf is critical to the master plan, how much more so are you critical to the master plan? We are not accidental. We are not significant. We don't just happen to be here because we had parents and they had parents and they came over on a ship or came over on a boat and a plane or ended up in Milwaukee somewhere. No. Nothing is accidental. Every single thing is purposeful. It's not just purposeful, it's meaningful beyond measure. Let's go to text number 12, a beautiful text by a very popular Hasidic Rebbe who's known as Reb Tzadok of Lublin. Text number 12, Mitchell, please. Loud and clear. Text number 12, Reb Tzadok.
In the lesson. 99. Just as we enjoin to believe in God, so must we subsequently believe in ourselves. In other words, we must believe that God has provided us with a mission in life, and our lives are not meaningless, but rather our souls come from God, the source of life, and God is delighted and satisfied when we execute his will.
So Reb Tzadok explains that you and I, every single one of us, are infinitely valuable to God. God absolutely needs us. I read this week such an incredible story that beautifully expresses this idea. There was a person who did not grow up with a tremendous amount of Jewish knowledge, Jewish experience, and befriended the Lubavitcher Rebbe's wife. And he said to the Rebbe that, I don't have a lot of time to daven. Right? For me, davening, it takes a long time. I'm not so good with the Hebrew. I don't have a lot of time. Could you please ask your husband, please ask the Rebbe, what is his favorite prayer? If I only have time for one prayer, I only have time for one. I'll say one prayer. And this guy was really hoping that the Rebbe would not come back and say it's the Amida, the Shemon Esrei. He said it's too long, he's never going to be able to make it. The Rebbe came back and said his favorite prayer is the Moda Ani prayer. The prayer that we recite when we wake up in the morning, where we are still in our bed, where we are thanking God for restoring our soul. And the Rebbe explained, why is it his favorite prayer? Because what the prayer means, God needs us. And God trusts us so much that he gave our soul. Like, we are so integral, we are so valuable to God. He trusts us so much that he has returned our soul to us every morning. The Rebbe said that is his favorite prayer, because it means how valuable and how meaningful each and every one of us is. There's a phenomenal story. I know that Rabbi Avremi told it many times, that there were two Chabad rabbinic students who went to the island of Curacao to visit and reach out to the Jews that were there. And they ended up befriending a Jewish man. The relationship became quite strong. And he ended up corresponding with the Lubavitcher Rebbe about how to educate his children and so on. And in one of his letters, he signed it, or at least he mentioned in the letter, like a small Jew or an insignificant Jew from Curacao. And the Rebbe responded to him, there is no such thing as a small Jew, right? There's no such thing as an insignificant person. Every person is of infinite value. God needs us, we're critical. If that leaf on a bush in the deepest, darkest mountains is critical to the purpose of creation, how much more so each and every one of us is critical to the purpose of creation. Another layer of meaning in this idea is that there are no accidents in life. If we find ourselves in a particular circumstance, whether we find it to be favorable or very unfavorable, it's because we're meant to be there, and there's an opportunity for us in that spot. Let's go to text number 13. Debbie, text number 13, please. We're going to the great Hasidic Rebbe, Rebbe Levi Yitzchak Aberditchev, on page 100. Text number 13.
Okay. We should recognize and fully appreciate that our travel to various locations are not random. Each journey is specifically directed by God. The divine intention in orchestrating these journeys is that each individual has been allotted a specific portion of the material world to spiritually rectify. Our portions are in specific locations to which we must journey. We accomplish these acts of rectification in a variety of ways, such as through studying Torah or praying in that location, or through eating, drinking, and sleeping there for the sake of properly serving God, or through another means of performing God's will in that place. The Baal Shem Tov associated this concept with the verse, God establishes the steps of man, meaning that a person's desire to relocate to a specific place is actually inspired by God for the purpose of that individual to engage in a particular aspect of divine service, thereby rectifying whatever this person has been appointed to rectify. Therefore, when we arrive at any given location, we must reflect on this deeper reality and challenge ourselves. Why am I here? It is certainly not random. For what achievement did God lead me to this spot?
There's a great story that reflects this idea so beautifully about a Chabad women's convention that took place in Detroit in the winter. Beautiful convention took place, and then so many of the women come to the airport, they're ready to fly home, and there's a terrible snowstorm. The airport is shut down, they're stuck, inconveniencing many people tremendously. One of the women at the convention reports to the Rebbe, beautiful convention, and we're now stuck in the airport. The Rebbe responded, there is no such thing as being stuck. Right? You're in the airport because that's exactly where you need to be. That's exactly where you need to be. There's no better place. You are on time for the most important moment of your life, which is every single moment. And the women thought to themselves, if I'm here, that means I'm here for a reason. And they reached out to Jewish passengers throughout the airport. They offered them Shabbos candles, right? Maybe, they made connections with people. And through the hours that they spent in the airport, they actually developed many, many meaningful relationships with people. They started really important conversations. got people in touch with various Chabad rabbis and rebbitzins, and they said to this day, right, there are women who they met and are lighting Shabbos candles every single Friday night as a result of those encounters. What does this all mean? Recognizing you're never stuck. There's no such thing as being stuck. You are exactly where you need to be. You're right on time. You're dressed perfectly. All you need to do is take advantage of the opportunity that presents itself to you. So I want to conclude with reviewing what we did today, and to ensure that you can kind of put it all together in a package and practice this hisbonenus at home, because there are so many transformative ideas that we discussed. All right, so number one, we discussed that we are constantly in God's presence, right? Just as our soul fills our body, so too God fills the entire world. The entire world is an expression of God, which means we are constantly in God's presence. We are never alone. We're completely surrounded by God. This should lead to joy. As King David said, as I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. We should feel safe. We should feel secure. We should feel empowered. We're never alone. Meditate on this. It is going to lift you out of any state of loneliness, of despair. It's going to replace it with joy and serenity. Another point we talked about today is that everything is intentional, right? Nothing happens by chance. Nothing is random. Everything is intentional. Meditate on that, right? And that is going to lift you out of anger and the frustration of things that you think are not exactly the way that they're supposed to be. When we recognize that everything is planned and guided, we're able to embrace it and let go of any resentment. Let go of the resentment. Embrace that this is where I am supposed to be. And as I mentioned earlier, there's no better hand that you can be in than God's hands. You are where you need to be. You are ready and prepared to do what needs to be done. And finally, we discussed that everything is part of the purpose of creation. Every detail that takes place and that happens is part of God's master plan. Not only is everything intentional, but everything that takes place is highly significant. For the very purpose that God created the world is part of that part of the master plan, which means we shouldn't just tolerate what is taking place in our life, but you can actually accept it with love and even excitement. You can embrace this challenge, which is your specific, unique challenge, which is part of the reason why you're here. You're here on this earth to tackle, to deal with, to face, to battle this particular challenge. Again, meditating on this, visualizing it, using hisbonenus, we are able to unlock our purpose in all of the various scenarios and experiences of life, even the challenging, even the hard, even the ones that we cannot even comprehend. So utilizing this hisbonenus type of meditation, again, these ideas are absolutely game changers. And it's one of the greatest gifts that you can give yourself to fully embrace and identify with these ideas. All right, let's go to the key points of the lesson.
Lesson 3, Mastermind, the benefits of divine closeness. 1. God is the soul of the world, and his presence animates all of existence. 2. Every detail of creation is deliberately designed by God and is formed by a unique expression of his presence in that being. 3. God is with us always, and we can feel his presence. 4. Nothing is by chance. Everything that happens is directed by God and is supposed to happen. 5. Everything that happens is an integral part of the master plan of creation. 6. Each one of us and every circumstance of our lives is relevant and important to the overall purpose of existence.
Right, your homework over the next week is to practice the Hispanus style of meditation, where you're going to contemplate on the fact that the true reality of everything, right, is its divine presence, its divine expression, it's its soul, and all of the things that we discussed in today's lesson of what that means and all the incredible, beautiful ramifications of it. And God willing, next week, we will continue with lesson number 4. Any questions, comments? Yes, Phil. Got to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on what Debbie was saying earlier regarding, the blade of grass, or let's just say a tree in the forest that's growing, manifesting God's presence, and then falls over in a storm, is no longer connected to the earth, gets no more nutrition. Maybe that, again, that's God's plan for that piece of wood then, and then it rots and goes away. And then another tree right next to it has the same fate, but this time someone comes by and takes it and makes it into a chair for his house. So the question I have is, you may have alluded to it, is that so the presence of God is in that chair, even though it's no longer connected to the nutrients and the growth and the sunshine that allows the wood to grow. And it does it, in essence, has the same fate as the wood that has withered away in terms of God's presence. So I'm just want to have just trying to make connection between something that's alive, that is flourishing, like flowers in my office that are blooming again. Who knows why? Because maybe that's God's plan to make my office look better or whatever, raise the spirits. And then something that is an inanimate object but used to be alive, like a tree, and our house is made of wood and it was surrounded by that. And so maybe you can just talk about that a little bit.
So for anything to exist, it has to have a soul. If it doesn't have a soul, it's not going to be dead. It won't exist. It simply will disappear out of all existence. Now, anything that's alive, anything that has a soul, there are different degrees of sophistication that soul has. So a human being, of course, is the most sophisticated. But after a human being passes away, the body remains. And the body is buried in the earth. And we go visit the grave because the body is there and the bones are there, which means a part of the soul of that person is there in the grave at that spot and at that location. If not, it couldn't exist. The body wouldn't decompose. It would simply cease to exist. What part of the person's soul is in the body? The least sophisticated part, right? The part that just makes it exist. Not the intellect, not the emotions. That is what ascends after a person passes away. The same thing with a tree. A tree has a life force that is actually quite significant because a tree grows, right? A tree has movement, a tree eats. I mean, a tree has many functions. It can produce sophisticated produce. But once that tree is cut down, so an element, the more sophisticated element of its soul is no longer present, but there's always at every second a soul, a spark of God that's animating it, that's giving its life, which is its essentially reality. Existence means God. There is no other way. So when it's a log, when it becomes a chair, it is an expression of God.
Okay, thanks.
The soul has 5 parts. There's nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida. The lowest level, nefesh, right, is the life force that sustains physical existence that's inanimate. Inanimate existence has a nefesh, has a soul, and then there's more sophisticated, right, emotion, intellect, subconscious, unity with God, and so on. Any other questions? Yes, Craig.
Very simple. Can you tell me where the videos are from these classes if we want to rewatch any of them?
Absolutely. So there's we can continue learning online, myjli.com/meditation. And there is one of the meditations with Rabbi Label Wolf from Australia discusses the 5 different levels of life, right? And he gives examples. So I believe it's in it's not in the first lesson. I'm almost positive it's in the second lesson. There are 2 different meditation videos. It's worth watching all of them. I just didn't find that they fit and work well with the Zoom model the way we're doing it at the moment, but they're all fabulous videos. And again, go to myjli.com/meditation. You have the PowerPoint, there's further education and really great meditation videos. So in lesson number 2, one of them, he actually goes through the different levels of life force that exists. So highly recommend checking it out. I'm going to shut off the recording.